Time together. I'm very happy to invite, to recognize Jackie Asiimwe, who's a friend. Now, she's been with us before for previous policy land, taken with the information, the subject matter, the discussion that she led for us regarding this very important topic of philanthropy. Philanthropy is a word that means the love of mankind, but it's used for our generosity, our giving. And it takes many different forms, as I think we'll probably hear today. And Western forms and African forms can be very different from each other. So we have a lot to think about in how we are generous in giving of our means to those in need. I think those are some of the things we're prepared to encounter today. Jackie is the CEO of CivSource, which in the US would be called, I think, a public interest law firm. Maybe that's not quite how she would describe it. As you can tell, she's a lawyer and an attorney.
I hope you're all fine.
Yeah.
Thank you for keeping time those that did. We are sorry for keeping you waiting. We were waiting for more of you to come, but we also had to test a few tech things. It's my honor and pleasure to be back here at my home when I was a little girl, as my mother studied to be a reverend. I came with a colleague of mine, Ashburn Kwesiga, please wave to the people. Ashburn works with us at CivSource and in particular works with me on our philanthropy work. Mark is approaching me, okay, but I have done something wrong. Okay, so I was told to tell you a little more about myself. I introduced myself as a lawyer by profession and an advocate by calling. The way I define an advocate is one who gives voice to. And I feel like in my life I have lent my voice to many causes, chiefly women's rights, but many other things along the way. I'm a pastor's child. At some point when my father was chaplain at Makerere University, we started a Pastors' Children's Association. And one of our primary aims was to give voice to the issues our parents face that they cannot tell their bishop in case they are fired. So we took it upon ourselves as pastors' children to talk about things like retirement benefits, if at all, to talk about things like how suddenly settling in and then you're uprooted. And I think without thinking about how it affects the rest of the family. We talked about things like how our mothers are literally church workers that are unpaid. Because when you're a pastor's wife, you're literally the co-pastor. We had the women's ministry, mothers union, Sunday school, Monday school, and yet you're not paid, right? But you're supposed to be there. So those are the kinds of things we talked about as the Pastors' Children's Association. I've spoken on issues of governance, corruption, electoral reforms. Right now, I believe the thing I am called to talk about in this season is about philanthropy. And so I welcome you to join me as we have this conversation. So I'm going to ask us to very quickly, and then if you pass those outside, just pick two each and pass down the line. Two each, pass down the line. And then some marker. Don't mind about the colors, they mean I think I know what Uganda, who do you think of when you hear the word philanthropist? And if possible, try and write it on the long form of the horizontal. That's what it's called. Nelson Mandela. Another one says, Mom. That is me. Another one said, donor. This person's late father, John someone. I'm going to murder this name if I try to say it. That one. Rihanna. Yes, John Scalabrini. Oprah Winfrey. Bill Hoot. I want us to hear the names and then we will start to Joanne and Joe Persons, Reverend Mugunya Duncan, Andrew Carnegie, Bill Gates, so I wrote Bill Gates twice on the same, John Magufuli, Bill Gates, Jack M.A., Bill Gates, Nelson Mandela, Sarah Mann, another one said Phil, Mother Teresa, Bill High, Martin Luther King Jr., President of the ghetto, of the nation, of the, just President, Jesus, Mahatma Gandhi. So, what do you hear when you read, what do you hear as I said these names? What is most common to these names? Yes?
Celebrities.
Celebrities? Anything else?
Wealthy people.
Wealthy people? Do you think that was common? Yes.
Freedom fighters.
Freedom fighters?
People who speak words of themselves.
Does that fall into the same category as freedom fighters or not really? Okay. As broadly defined, not necessarily lawyers, right? Okay. Anything else? Yes.
People who fit in boxes.
People who are, and this category doesn't define any of them. Donors. What else did we hear? Yes.
Social entrepreneurs.
Social entrepreneurs and
Christians.
Christians. Okay.
Heroes.
Heroes. Heroes from the dead. Heroes. Okay? So, non-Ugandans. Mostly, yes.
But we have some.
But in the majority were non-Ugandans, right? Yes? So, remember the question was, when you hear the word philanthropist, who comes to mind? So what is a philanthropist? What is philanthropy?
Giving to those who do not have.
The act of giving to those who do not have. We can take another. Do we remember what he said, what Lauren said? Yes.
It's those who stand in the gap for others.
Those who stand in the gap for others. Okay. Like prayer warriors are philanthropists? Rather intercessors? Because those stand in the gap, right? If philanthropists are those that uplift the well-being of people, give to those who don't have, if it is those that are generous and those who stand in the gap, have any of us here ever done those things? Have any of you ever uplifted someone's well-being, given to those who don't have, been generous to somebody, and stood in the gap for someone? Is that an experience we share?
Yes.
So did anyone write their name when I asked when you think of a philanthropist?
Good.
So why don't we think of ourselves as philanthropists? If we say we have done all those things, yes.
I think the names that have been provided are people that have intentionally put in place, they have put themselves in place to plan and take as something they want to do. Specifically, generosity, what they have.
So
Like when you say us, sometimes we don't have a plan, we just give them a free PT or say something like, okay, she does do. Sometimes.
okay, he said he thinks there's a plan to it. You first must have planned, yes? And I'll come to you. I'll see your hand. Yes.
I think when it comes to me, I would not, I didn't give out my name because it's not justifiable. Like on the other side, it is from me. And those are the names of people we have had at least being spoken and cited when it comes to maybe giving back and improving the welfare of some other people.
But you have given back and improved the welfare, okay? As the, yes.
The reason my name is from tonight when we asked about who we think about when the word philanthropy is because from my exposure to the term, it seems it's people who are with a specific network who do all these things and it doesn't make a dent in their bank accounts. So they feel like, oh, I've achieved all my goals, at least the next step is just to change people's lives. Yeah. So that's why my name is but I think now I can see.
Okay. Was there a hand this side before they... Okay, and then you go that side.
My name didn't come out because
Or you forgot the spelling of your name?
just because you can't recall your own language.
But it's yours, so who will
No, I can't speak for myself, so it's others to speak for.
Okay. There were one or two hands this side. Chairman, the gentleman in blue.
My name was Untitled, and as well as many of you, and because of these two reasons. One, I want to believe that not every one of us did any work philanthropist. That's why maybe we didn't try to make one. Two, having all that's done is not sufficient enough to become a philanthropist. I think there is something that must be added on to that.
Which is?
Rather, as we are going to share, we shall get it.
I thought you were going to add for us.
Yes, mine has written inside.
Yes.
I think the fact that I didn't write my name is just because I wasn't even thinking about myself. So it has something to do with maybe selflessness. And I would rather, like my brother was saying, it should come from someone else. I should be the one blowing my own trumpet.
But it's blow my trumpet, anyhow. I understand what you mean. So, one more? Yes, go ahead, sorry.
I think when we think of philanthropy,
That one.
it's on a large scale. If it's on a large scale, there's a big chance of money. So someone like me or us, to that extent.
What is your name?
I'm Ignatius.
Ignatius. Ignatius, without telling us how much money you have, don't you think you have, in terms of it, when juxtaposed with a much, much poorer person, don't you have a lot of money?
I do.
Because what is a lot of money? In whose eyes?
In the eyes of the richest man in the world, I think on that scale.
Okay. Okay. So it's very interesting. One of the things that Simsource is passionate about, and I didn't tell you about our organization, it is a non-profit consulting firm, and what we do is give advisory services to philanthropists, but we're also very interested in understanding local philanthropy and how it happens and what drives giving and what is giving in the Ugandan or African context. So we are going along that road. And for those who were in the first conversation we had on this, we talked about how one of the things we want to do as Simsource is try and enable people to see that philanthropy is a spectrum, because giving happens along a continuum. We don't all have the same needs, right? But we are all human, and we all feel for another person. So while someone will take out an $100 million check, the person who takes out 1,000 shillings to pay for a person who can't afford a taxi ride is no less a giver. Isn't that it? you're all givers. When Lawrence was making the introduction, he said, philanthropy is the love of humanity. But somewhere along the way, philanthropy became how much money you have. And that was never the basis of philanthropy. The basis of philanthropy is love. So, as long as I love another human enough to meet that human's need, I am a philanthropist. And I know that we also had a conversation about, yes, but that might be a word that's too big, and maybe it's for, I want to give the 100 million shilling, $100 million check. And so we are also looking into how do we democratize the word so that all of us can see ourselves as philanthropists? And how do we create a narrative that in fact enables all of us to see ourselves as philanthropists? So that is one. The other question, and we are breaking these concepts down and we will bring them together. The title of my talk was Community Philanthropy as the Next Big Thing in Development Financing. So, do we understand what philanthropy is? Are we clear on that? It is what? Love for humanity. It is not about how much money you have. Because in fact, if you think about Mother Teresa, did she have a lot of money? But what was she doing in the slums of Calcutta? She was giving of her time, of her expertise, and she rallied around her communities of volunteers who were helping people in slums. Because I think we've also come to think of philanthropy only as money, as if to say, giving can only be done through the currency of cash. But is that it? Is that necessarily so? So we also want to, in democratizing the word, it's to say it's a continuum and all of us can give and all of us have something to give. Even if it is helping an old lady cross the road and you want to tell the taxi person stop so that you can help a child, you can help, that is it is the love of humanity. It is not how much money you have in your bank account or the excess of which you give. We talked about, I'm assuming, but I don't want to make assumptions, do all of us identify as Christian? I don't want to give an example that does not resonate. Yes, no. Not saved, I say Christian. No? None of us is Christian. You're a Christian, I think. Okay. So, the example I gave the last time we had this conversation was about the old woman who gave her last coin. And what did Jesus say of that woman? She has given the most. But in the world, who do we look at when we are measuring who has given the most? We're looking at the Bill Gates and all those other names I couldn't pronounce. Rihanna, Oprah Winfrey, because somehow we've made giving about an amount. And we've forgotten that giving is about the heart. Omutima, omugalo. A heart that gives. Because I guess giving cannot happen if the heart is not touched, is not moved to give, right? Because you will even then give the last blanket so that another person doesn't feel cold, right? So giving is about love, it's about the heart. So what is community? Yes.
Community, society, the people in the society, and the things going on in the society.
Okay.
A community is a group of people who live together and they share a lot in common.
A group of people who live together and share a lot in common. Yes.
The environment within us, including people and the rest of the living things.
Okay. There was a hand at the back you need.
Within which people share something in common.
Sorry, it can be I didn't hear.
A social unit.
Okay.
People share something in common.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll first take the lady in red.
Community is a group of people who live and work together.
Who live and work together, okay? And then we'll take two last ones.
Yeah, a community which can as well be a society. I can find it as a relationship between the economic base and the superstructure, which of course is led by the people.
Okay. Please speak English, but yes. Just easily. Yes.
In addition to what they have said, I think the other words are important in defining a community. Coexistence and togetherness. Yeah, so I thought that makes a community.
Okay. So there's people and there's relationships. And commonality sometimes in community. Okay. And then just one last thing that I'll ask us to do very quickly can we group in fours very, very quickly, is then to define development. Among the four of you, just find any four people that you can sit together quickly with and define development.
Positive progress or growth.
Sorry, I didn't hear the first words.
Define development as positive progress or growth or improvement from one level or stage to another.
Okay. Growth, improvement, one stage to another, yes.
Movement refers to the positive growth of our society from one stage to another in all aspects, for example, health, social, industrial, and many others.
Okay. Thank you so much. Is that mic working? I feel like I can't hear. It is, okay. So let's just raise our voices a bit. It's a bit low.
Development as qualitative and quantitative growth in all aspects of life. Those are mental, physical, economic, political, and social aspects.
Okay.
Economically, socially, and physically.
As well-being of society.
The progress towards well-being of society. Okay, Lisa. Okay, there's one there.
Precisely, we define development as a shift from any given status to a higher one in all aspects of life.
So what words struck you as common as we read our definitions? Positive? So if there's regression, that is not development. Development is forward, is positive, yes. And what else? Growth? Pardon?
She says quantitative.
Okay. Quantitative is help those of us who went to UPD schools. Mass. Numbers. So a positive shift or growth for a large section.
Then the quality, the quantitative.
It comes with how better are you developing, are you improving?
Okay. And it's a gradual process, it doesn't happen overnight. I don't come and develop you and you're developed. Like, I found you sick today and tomorrow you're better. And so it's gradual. Meaning, I suppose that there will be some times it goes back up like 2 steps back, or 1 step forward. Because we're dealing with humans, right? And humans don't always change at the same pace. Some will resist change, some will. So, anything else that we had that was common? People power. No, sorry. What did you say? Power.
No.
Oh. Okay. I will believe you. That's what you said. Community aspects. Okay. Anyone last word that was common as we said our definitions? So I think we generally have an idea, right? So when we try and put the 3 big things together, community philanthropy for development, what does that look like for you? Remember, we defined what philanthropy is, we defined community, and now we define development. And what we are saying this afternoon is that community philanthropy leads to, contributes to development. Do you think that is true? You're sure?
Yes.
So we will build the case slowly. Can one of us read this? Can you all see this? Can one of us read it, please?
Look at own development because it builds on the assets that already exist within communities rather than depending only on what comes from the outside.
Okay, sorry, read it again. What is, so that it flows like a sentence, sorry.
What is community philanthropy? Look at your own development because it builds on assets that already exist within communities rather than depending only on what comes from outside.
Okay, so what are the key words? It's locally owned. Oh, sorry, they said my control. I'm sorry about that. It's locally owned. It builds on assets that already exist within communities rather than depending only on what comes from outside. But when we think about how development is defined or done in our country, it seems as though this is the only part that's happening, depending on what comes from outside. Isn't that the general feeling? That we need others to help us. That's how we get government, etuyambe, wanachewa watuyambe. And yet, locally, community philanthropy is about building on assets that already exist. So it's not only one side, it is both sides coming together. Right? Are we clear? A few of those instances that it happens, and I'm sure there are many stories among us about community philanthropy in action. I'll ask Ezra to tell us the story of this trench.
So this is a very simple story. So in southwest Uganda, there's a district called Kanungu, which I'm sure some of us know. So Kanungu is located between two national parks. On one side is Queen Elizabeth Park, which is famous for the tree climbing lands, and on the other side is Buwindi Impenetrable Forest, which is famous for the tree climbing, for the mountain gorillas. So in Queen Elizabeth, at the Queen Elizabeth Park, the community residents, so the community residents of a village called Bukori had a problem. The elephants in the national park, Queen Elizabeth, would cross over into the human settlements to hunt food, but they would cross over into human settlements and they would destroy gardens, and in some cases they would destroy small houses because there are no proper gardens and watermelon and fruits in the national parks. So the elephants would move over to the human settlements looking for food, but in the process they would destroy a lot of property. So the people in this village called Bukoro, which is somewhere in Kanungu, had a very simple option. The first one was to kill the elephants, but they didn't do that. What they did, they decided amongst themselves to approach government to fix this issue. So the government told them that they were going to procure a group of trees called, I don't know what these trees are called in English, but in the local language they call them mukono. So they are very, very hard trees, but also very, very flammable. So the government suggested to them that they would plant a line of those trees, which would then form a fence or a boundary between the human settlements and the national parks. But the residents refused because they were afraid that these trees were very flammable. So after months and months of waiting for government to do something about it and nothing happened, they decided on their own that they were going to dig a trench, and there's a picture of the trench here, that was so deep and so wide that it could create a boundary between the village and the national parks. So what they did, they dug a trench that was 5 meters deep and about 1.5 meters wide. But when the elephants, wanted to cross over, they realized that a boundary had been created. Now, during the process of digging this trench, the residents left heaps of soil
right next to the trench, or at the top of the trench. So what the elephants did is that they started to kick the soil back into the trench to fill it so that they could access the other side of the community. So the community residents started to get frustrated, but what they did is they made a plan. They would meet every Wednesday to dig the trench deeper from 5 meters to 7 meters and to make it even wider. So they gave equipment, spades, wheelbarrows, money, bushera, because when you're doing that kind of labor work, you get tired. So they decided amongst themselves to collect whatever resources that they had to build this boundary that would separate the national park and the community. In the end, it took them up to about 6 years, but they dug a trench that was 7 feet deep, 1.5 meters wide, and it is 7 kilometers long. Now, I don't know if any of you really can perceive how long a kilometer is. So this picture might not show it really well, but the trench goes all the way. All that is the trench, and it stops at the Uganda-Congo border. The only thing that stopped this community was an international boundary. And on the other side, the Congolese government built an iron fence, to keep the elephants away from the human settlements. So it took them. We don't really, because the community did not keep record of how much they spent while building this elephant trench. We know from engineers that if government had hired people to do this kind of work, you would need an excavator. I think that it's called an excavator. It looks like a huge caterpillar-like tractor which goes, digs, and puts it out. Now, the cheapest excavator that you can find is, you would hire it at 1.5 million shillings per day. And in a day, depending on the speed that the person is working at, because some of them are really slow, because the slower they work, the more they get paid. They might dig up to about 100 meters, meaning it would take them 10 days to dig a kilometer. It will then take them 70 days. Is it? No, 10 days? Yeah, 70 days to dig 7 kilometers. Can someone help me in the math? 1.5, yeah, times 70. So that's 105 million. I mean, if you decided to do it on your own. But if you hired a construction company to do this job, they would not charge you less than 700 million. So the point of this story is to show that a community can get together and solve a serious infrastructure problem that would have required a lot of money for government to fix.
So going back to what we were discussing, community philanthropy, do we see it in action? Have we understood how a community using locally available assets, manpower, bushera, holes, people contributing what they have to fix a problem? Is that development? Yes, no? Yes. We visited a place called, is it Matanda? No, I don't remember, but it is in Kisoro, near the lake. The lake is Mutanda. Yes, so forgive our title. We visited this young man who grows mushrooms. This young man is very passionate about child education. And he was very concerned that children in that village that is on the shores of Lake Mutanda were not going to school. Actually, what we don't have a picture of, the community came together and actually built a school. So they solved problem A. At the same time, of course, the school needs paper, it needs teachers, it needs, so the little money they could collect from school fees was going to pay for the school to be able to run. Did that mean all children could access the school? Unfortunately, no. So this young man whose mushroom project we visited said he thought of what he could do. And he wanted to use his hands. He didn't have a lot of money. He wanted to use his hands as a way to contribute to some children going to school. Because he said he knows the power and benefit he got from education, the power of education and the benefit that he got. And he looked around, wondered what could he do, and then he heard that in Kavale town, there was a group that was training youth on mushroom growing. And so he paid for himself, drove a bus to Kavale, and attended a 7-day training on mushroom growing. So he came back and talked to the elders in the community who gave him a piece of land on which he grows mushrooms. And through this mushroom growing, he is able to pay for 5 children to go to school. Does that seem like a lot? Maybe not. But he is solving part of a problem of the community, enabling these children to go to school. What he does when the children are in the holiday, he brings them to the mushroom project so that they can help him fetch water. He's also passing on a skill so that maybe one day they too can have a project that helps their community. So that is another one. And this is literally because the community gave him the land and because they knew what he wanted to do to help solve a community problem. That community philanthropy is very key for development. The challenge is that when we talk about development, and especially Africa, I think we only hear one side of the story. And which side of the story do we hear? Which side of the development story do we hear? The money side, the side that it is others who are developing us, right? I think in the story that Eshban told in Kanungu, one of the, why am I speaking back to myself? One of the conservation societies also added some money, but really it was mostly the community effort. However, of course, as a conservation society, I have a newsletter, and what story will I tell? Will I tell theirs or will I tell mine? Whose story will I tell? So who blows whose trumpet? So if we are not blowing our trumpet, no one is blowing it for us, right? If we are not telling the stories of communities stepping in to develop their communities, we will only hear one side of the story. And we'll usually hear the side of the story, and no offense to my brothers in the room, of a Western white giver coming to develop us. Does that negate what they do? No. It's just that that is not the only story. Okay? That's all we are saying. It's not the only story about giving. We also give every day, all our lives, to various community causes. I want to show us a brief video, different ways that communities can give, right? Yes? So I hope I'm building a case. We started by defining who we think a philanthropist is, and we talked about what philanthropy is, what community is, and what development is. And I hope you see the thread through that any of us, in fact all of us, right, are philanthropists in our own right, yes? Because we've all given to someone in need at some point. We are all part of various communities. And when we come together as communities to solve a community problem, we are aiding the development chain. And it doesn't have to be money only. People have given dance, people have given school fees, people have given blankets, people have opened their homes and sheltered runaway girls. People have, it's all kinds of things, as long as it is in the aid of another human being. Community philanthropy is the way to go. Why do you think it would be viable to concentrate or to put our focus and energy on community philanthropy as the best way to do development? Are we crazy to think like that? What do you think? Yes. Okay, microphone. What is your name, sir? Kenneth.
It would be the best way to bring about development because you use what you have, not necessarily what you do not have. Use what is available in the community to empower every other person. And in so doing, you're able to maximize the resources that are available, human resource, material resource, etc.
Thank you. Now go ahead.
Initially, I come from a place where NGOs have been operating.
But is the mic on?
It's on.
Okay.
I come from a place where NGOs have been operating for the last 60 years. And initially, and these NGOs, their projects have never been successful. Their projects have never impacted the lives of the community member. So I believe the number of reasons because the community do not own the processes where these policies are designed from. And I believe once they start doing it within amongst themselves, they will own it and they actively participate and ensure that it impacts on them.
When you talk about community philanthropy, yeah, it's the best way to go for now because it really, according to me, it involves almost less of the bureaucracies which we have really observed in the current leaders, that people are much attached to the power and the title that he or she has to attach a signature for you to proceed further. But when it comes to community progression, you really need to mobilize the people who are around, and then something can be done as long as it is and it's positive. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to start by admitting that before we started this discussion, my idea of philanthropy was very different. And when we wrote the names there, one of the names I wrote, or the name I wrote, is Bill Bunte. My idea of philanthropy was that someone with a lot of money disposes it of. And I've come to learn that it may not be money, resources helping out those that are disadvantaged in the community. And I've come to think of a lot of charity organizations that come from outside Uganda. So, for instance, we have people who sit down and identify specific areas. For example, they see a community and they be like, you know what, let us go and help schools, let us take books, let us take clothing, and they identify specific things. But let us imagine community philanthropy, where a community sits down and says, we have a lot of challenges, we have a lot of things going on. How do we help ourselves? Let us sit as a community and build schools. Let us sit as a community and help, single mothers. Let us sit as a community and build hospitals. So I think that is the way to go because a community better knows the challenges that they go through. Someone else sits from outside and identifies just one thing and comes and focuses on that. So what happens to the other things that are not looked at by those persons? So I think, community philanthropy is the way to go.
I believe that government is not all about the facilities you have, but having the real people who are willing to work together for a common good. And I think this kind of work raises a social responsibility through that social contract made by the people. Once you believe in yourself, you can be able to push overwhelming in a way which is perfect. In a way that if you look at the example
to do development, right? There is a role that government must play because we pay our taxes so that they can be fairly distributed across the country for social services. There is a role that development partners play, there is a role that NGOs play, and there is a role for communities. The point is, I think the community participation and contribution in development is little seen and hardly recognized. If we hear next year the speech of the Minister of Finance, whoever it will be, he will talk about, or she, how many taxes have been raised to revenue, how many, even our giving is not recognized nationally. And that is a policy issue. Because I think a government that thinks about and recognizes and names and celebrates giving will quantify it so that it shows that we all contribute to our development. It is not them versus us. It is not outsiders doing for us. It is all of us, because all of us are human and all of us want a better life. So that, please, you can clap. Yeah, so that is the point. It is not to negate the other forms, but I think the other forms have had more airtime than communities. And I think community philanthropy, community giving, has not been elevated to the same level. Because again, we think those who give more are to be celebrated more. But giving happens whether I give my blanket or whether you give your $100 million. It is all giving, because we all want another human to be better. So, imagine with us, how many villages are there in Uganda? It's not a number. You're trying to think. Okay, I think as at last count, and trust our statistics, it was about 60,000 villages. Now imagine, and I'm merely guessing, right? We're merely guessing because we don't yet know the actual data. Imagine that probably within each village there are at least 3 community projects going on of about $1 million shillings. And I'm just using $1 million as, could be 500 million, it could be, who knows. Let's say $1 million. So what is 60,000 times 3 projects times $1 million shillings? Who can calculate that for us? 60,000 villages times 3 projects per village, community projects times $1 million shillings per project. What is the figure that we get? How much? 1.8 trillion. And we're merely guessing, right? So imagine with me, because we said communities are different. Imagine with me the number of churches across this country doing community projects, building schools, building hospitals, doing medical camps. Imagine that and multiply. Imagine with me the number of Rotary clubs across this country, times the number of projects that they do, times the number of people they reach. Imagine with me alumni associations. I'm part of GOGA, Gaza Old Girls Association, and there are many alumni associations across this country giving back to their schools, right? What other communities are there? Imagine with me lawyers trying to build a center. We had one of the stories that we profile on our website is a lawyer who, on his birthday, instead of receiving gifts, asked people to contribute money, and the money that was contributed he took to Njeru prison, I believe. So imagine with me the number of lawyers. What other communities? Imagine with me. So can you see how much we are contributing to development? Can you imagine that figure? But we don't even know it. And part of the reason we don't know it is, one, we don't see it, we don't tell it. We don't see it, we don't tell it. But imagine with me. So how much, and moreover, I've counted money projects. We haven't counted people volunteering time, people giving their clothes and shoes, people giving their homes to, we haven't counted all of that. But imagine we counted all the ways that communities are giving to support each other to be better. Can you begin to imagine what that figure looks like? That is the story we want to tell. Because we believe when communities are changing lives, we're just not telling the story enough if it's being told. And so, we are. Like seriously, this is mind-blowing stuff. Just imagine how much giving, how much development is happening in community every day in this country. To join us in this journey of telling the stories, because Eshban and I and the few people that we are at Source won't be able to. We need to blow this trumpet. And it is our trumpet to blow. We need to own the trumpet that we blow. We're soon breaking off for the Christmas holiday, yes? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So do you mind if I give you homework? Do they call it homework at university? Take what? Take home. Okay. I'd like to give you a take home. As you go, wherever you will be at Christmas, try and look out for, ask around about a community project, a community philanthropy, a way that the community that you'll be in is giving. And we'd like you to write that story. If you can't write it, take a video, but describe it as you're doing the video. We want to tell these stories. We want to be able to, one of the things that we are building is a data, what did you call it?
Giving tracker.
Giving tracker. Because we want to track the many ways that Ugandans are giving all across this country, so that you can pinpoint to a place and be able to see all the giving that's happening. Wouldn't that be beautiful? But we can't do it ourselves. So please, and if you do, we would like to use your story, if you don't mind, on our website. We really want to tell and celebrate the ways that Ugandans are giving. Can you do that with us?
Yes.
Are you sure you will? You can try or you will do. Which one? You can try or you will do. Because why? Can someone read that for us?
Until lands have their own historian tells, the hunt will always glorify the hunter's African proverb.
Wanti, how did you read that?
Until lions have their own historians, tales of hunt will always glorify the hunters.
And the hunters only see their side of the story, right? They will never see your side of the story. And that's the side we want to tell. Because development doesn't happen only one way by only a certain group of people. It happens all day, every day around us. We just have to open our eyes and see it and then tell those stories. So please tell those stories with us, so that we can tell the story of how Ugandans are participating in their own development every day that we live. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much. You talked about us imagining, and I started imagining, and I'm actually having headaches, so I don't know how many things like this one in terms of expressing or converting the level of imagination. We are going to buy sometime, our tea is here to be set. We're going to ask three questions. Please be precise and concise.
And I wanted to give us I'm really serious about getting stories. I hope that in a room of, how many are we?
We are 38.
38. That we will at least get 37 stories. Is that a good deal?
So who will be that one?
I'm going to, I'm going to give you the email.
Very much. So my question has to do with the governance of the community. There are situations where the people in the community have tried to take matters into their own hands, and there is opposition from political leaders, or basically political leaders. So what can an individual who wants to go out into the community and do something that will positively impact on the community do about such kind of opposition?
A very, very bad road. It was back and forth and haggling and no, and yes, maybe partly because they assumed you are, there was all that. And so they waited and kept asking. And one day, because government knew they were anyway maybe not ever going to do that road, they allowed them. So that's part of it. So again, don't assume that it only happens in some faraway villages. No, this was right here in the middle of town. And these are people asking to tarmac a road that they use. They're not even asking for money for it. And it was denied severally. But they kept pushing. And I also don't want us to look at this as though I am going to help. No. First of all, it is seeing what our community is already doing. And can we tell that story before we start inserting ourselves as helpers. And I'm not even saying it's bad to help, but it's first opening our eyes to what is already happening, so that is what we first tell. But also, and then how can I participate with my community? And we said there are various communities that we belong to, and various ways that we can give. But it's first to even just open our eyes. So I think for me the issue would be persistence. And if we can, because we're educated, and sometimes it is what it is, they'll respect you, an educated person, more than another. I had the unfortunate situation recently. One of my gym instructors just wanted to change his ID card because they got his names wrong on his national ID. But every time he went, I guess because they look at you and figure, shall serve you when we get to you. And so he said, can you help me? So I asked a colleague who is a lawyer, he was always dressed in suits, because I knew, unfortunately, that he will be regarded higher, better than this guy who can't dress as well. And so he escorted him. That was all this required. Just come with me to the office, and it happened. So it's sometimes our education can access us places that a community may not. Maybe it is a project that they need to write. Maybe it is a certain, whatever it is, you can always see how to. But yeah, yes, we will bump against development because it's not an easy road, right? And sometimes people want to take all the credit. And so they block communities doing their thing. But persistence and insistence.
But now when the money aspect came in, it brought the materialism, and people are rewarding materialism. So it is how much we have, which has cropped into the individualism aspect of it, and people are thinking of their own. Now when we're looking at this, how much of this growing capitalism syndrome is going to affect this? Especially, this was our format originally, and somehow it overshadowed it. How much are we, and how are we ready to suppress the capitalism perspective so that we strike a balance to see the money aspect is there, but whereas also the communities are now thinking of working together more.
We're in a growing and changing society, I would say, and most of, I'm sorry, but for our fellow Western cultures that have invaded into our community and society, we have tended to, should I say copy? Yes. We have, okay, now if we are to go way back in history, when they came into Africa, okay, how should I say it? In Uganda, they used indirect rule, who were being headed by the chiefs, mainly the Buganda chiefs. So in this, they would maybe say dressing, you would wear a suit, maybe a dress with a hat, okay, all that. So in all that, we kept on picking a few things. Because we can't say it's assimilation, like how let's say they forced onto us, no, we weren't forced, but we copied because we saw they looked so much better than us and wanted to go towards that end. So the government of Uganda has put us in a position whereby they want us to be like them, but we are not them.
And people are forgetting that what they want is for themselves. I'm going to get money for myself and my family, full stop. I'm not going to care about, let's say, father relatives or people around me. It's like the way you're going to go to Kololo or Nakasero, and those people in their gates, you want to get to know your neighbor. You know, people are selfish. Then when they want to give, let's say, out, they're going to fundraise, but in expensive dinners. You know, they won't say, let's go to maybe Nakasongola or to Chinawataka and, you know, come in as a community and let's say clean or provide clothes to the orphans. So capitalism starts with the leaders. People are selfish, honestly. Recently, the Land Board sat commission, and these guys found out that grabbing was in the rural areas where they wouldn't get to find them. So you grab land from a poor person who has nothing, and you wouldn't have anything to say, let's compensate or what. So people copy from their leaders. So that's how capitalism comes about. You go, copy from your leader is stealing money, greedy, what? They provide medicine to the people. They'll end up stealing it and selling it to other countries, in maybe Congo or Rwanda or Tanzania, and to get money for themselves. So I believe that it's just about a common understanding. If the leaders will show a good example to their fellow people, you know, then yeah, I don't think capitalism will be that much of an issue.
Wonderful. It's easy for a government to come and tell you that without them, we would be nothing. It's easy for donors to come and tell us without them, we would be nothing. All we are saying is that it is a spectrum, and all of us contribute. The main story we have heard is when those outside of our community, whether it's government or other ones, that's the side of the story that we hear. What I'm inviting us to think about and open our eyes to is the ways communities are there for each other. If you want to remove the capital equation, but money does help, let's also then open our eyes and look for and tell the stories that celebrate giving that is non-monetary. And I'm sure there are many. And I'm also sure that giving happens both ways. We give of our time, of our labor, of our ideas, of our money, it happens, giving happens in multiple ways. What gets recognized, known, and celebrated is giving that's attached, that has a monetary value. So let's open our eyes to the ways communities are giving, whether monetary or non-monetary. The other thing is that, remember that even as communities are meeting their needs in various ways that we are going to look for and showcase, we also pay tax because we are citizens of a certain country. And I don't want us to walk out of here thinking we can't do anything. Otherwise, what is a policy lab for? The fact that we have government means that there are people that we've handed a responsibility. And part of that responsibility is development. And that while we are looking out for telling and celebrating the ways communities are there for each other, we are also demanding of government the responsibility around how they use our tax, around how they treat those that are corrupt. We are not leaving that conversation, because if we leave that, it will get much worse. So we must be responsible citizens at both ends, recognizing and celebrating and showcasing the ways communities are there for each other, but also equally demanding with as much vigor that they do right by us. And I also don't want to assume that leadership only happens via government through politics. Any of us are leaders. And that's why communities take things into their hands, because at that level they're exercising that leadership. I will not wait for another. We will solve our problems together with the means that we have. We'll try and go as far as we can so that we help each other. So it's please hear both things, right? It's not just one way, it's just that one certain way has been told more than what communities are doing. And what we want to do is celebrate and tell and have the policy conversation about what would it look like to acknowledge. Just begin with acknowledging, even before you contribute to community development. Just begin by acknowledging how much communities are contributing to their development. And once we can aggregate that in the number of stories, times the number of villages, that's why it's giving us all, imagine all the ways we are doing community and giving. Acknowledge that. And once you acknowledge that, have a policy conversation about, so how do we enhance it? How do we support it? Is it by tax relief? Is it by what ways can we support and acknowledge community contribution to development?
My question was, you talk about community philanthropy, which is a very good topic, and it's a very good policy, just in case it's put in action. But I have a question, I have a concern that being a student of history, community philanthropy is just a modified word to mean something that was practiced by our ancestors, which was bourgeoisie, if you can speak with that, it was bourgeoisie during that time. But because of the different trends that have been coming in place in Africa and Uganda in particular, things like communism, things like capitalism, things like that, things have changed to the other way around. This is the reason as why someone once said that things were changing back to their awesome state, that every state was going to their awesome, to their oneness and living everyone was now shifted, or everyone has shifted in this generation, that they are simply considering their own families, their own places. Actually, not even places, but someone. The question is, what? The question is me. How am I benefiting from what I will be doing? It's fully in Uganda. Then someone, I come from a tiny village in Luweero, whereby we have a borehole just before our home. But this borehole, for the time it has stayed there, it is only my dad that will always finance its operation. Just in case he fails to finance it for the rest of the year, it will not be working. Now this is the kind of the society that we are living in today. That community philanthropy is something good, but how are we going to bring it back? Like, how are we going to make a typical African, someone like me, or someone that has not gone, because I've gone to school, then I can rationalize. But how, someone that has not gone to school, and it's the majority in my village, how are we going to influence them embrace community philanthropy?
Let's go to look for the alternative narrative. Are there selfish people in the world? Are there selfless people in the world? So to paint with one brush and call all of us selfish and we only take care of is one narrative, and can we back it up? What we are inviting you to do is also look for and back up the alternative narrative. When are communities not selfish? When are people not selfish? And how do we spotlight that? Because, again, think, if you want to change a story, if you want to change a policy, you go out and look for the evidence. And what we want is evidence of communities doing things differently, evidence of communities not waiting for things to happen, but rather making things happen. So yes, in your village, the community is not fixing the well. But what initiative are they rallied behind? So rather than look for what they are not doing, we want to look for what our community is doing, and how, and with whom, and when, whether it is for their own or for others. And remember, we talked about communities. It's not just one thing. It's not just my village and our relatives. There are communities of professionals. There are communities of Rotary clubs. There are communities of churches. We commune in various ways. So again, let's not come away from here thinking that when we say community philanthropy, we only mean, what is my village? Muyenga A village, right? So again, let's open our mind and open our eyes to see various communities and the various ways giving is done. Because that's the story we want to tell. Are we saying there is no selfishness in it, no corruption? No, that's not what we're saying. We're just saying that can we open our eyes to what is actually going on. When Tibandeke tells his story of a person with physical disability, but loving to dance, saying, I will use my gift to help other children that are differently abled express themselves through dance. He's not related to any of those children, but he's giving what he has to those children. When Annette tells you that as mothers they congregate to rescue women caught in trafficking, none of them are their daughters. They are reaching out of themselves, so it is happening. But are there communities that just give to themselves? Yes, they are. So I'm not saying it's either or. We're not drawing a line in the sand and calling one good or bad. It's just, can we look for those unlikely stories where communities, and it's not just a village, communities are giving to address community needs.
Thank you. We want to stick with 2 questions and we have an announcement. So do not give us a narrative of your question, just be precise and concise. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The way you have outlined your submission, I feel giving goes hand in hand with learning. And Uganda, in particular Africa, we've come to a level where you find that people have lost their love to their communities. Like they have dropped that I don't care attitude. So they feel like even if I don't care, even if I give, what will I benefit from it? So I would like to know whether alongside the message of giving, is there something backing the giving message up, especially the message of love, like making people feel this is yours, this is what you owe. And I feel like if people get to know that this is mine, there's no way they can fail to give.
Okay. It's very interesting you asked that question. I just came in from Arusha yesterday, and I was attending a young people's leadership summit called You Lead. And the presentation I gave, I actually called it What's Love Got to Do with It? And I was talking about philanthropy and business. And the basic message was, if we go back to the definition of philanthropy, it's about love for humanity. Again, we may have an idea of what the Bible says. 1 Corinthians 13. If I give my life for the poor but have not love, I am doing nothing, right? So again, I think when we essentialize giving to just money, it is very easy for me to be detached. I can give out of obligation, I can give out of one. Leave me alone and I will. Does that kind of giving happen? It does. But does giving that is driven by love happen? It also does, right? So again, it is what narrative we choose to see and align behind. Will there be people who give out of selfishness, out of see me and you take the photo and then I go and that show is all about me? Yes. But are there people who absolutely would even die for the very community they are living? Yes. And those are the stories we want to tell. And again, remember that my point was, we're not negating the forms of giving that happen. We're simply saying that communities are giving in ways that support community growth, progress, development. That story isn't told enough. We're not going into motivation. That is a question even for research, because we might be assuming people's motives. Unless you come and ask me why I have given, you're merely going to assume my motive. So let's tell the story, let's surface all these questions. At CISOS, we are doing a research in 5 districts on giving in Uganda. And as Clement, I'd love to come back and share those results once the research is done. But one of the questions we want to ask, because there is no hard and fast evidence for me or for us yet, and we have looked. Who is giving? What are Ugandans giving to? What are the motivations? What drives people to give? And then surfacing that data to present it. Both for understanding so that we know how, so if giving is mostly done selfishly, how do we motivate people to give with a different motive? If giving is, but for now we can only make assumptions. And I don't want us to keep living on assumptions about the ways Ugandans live. At the very least, let's try and understand what it is. Yes, Burundiwansi is another name, I mean, and there may be different ways we call the ways communities come together to give. I was trying to remember what it is in Runyankole, but I've forgotten it. One of the other things that we're doing, which I told the first group that we met, we're even going into proverbs and stories about giving, because it is innate in us as humans to give. Just as it is to hate, to love, all those things are human. And so we're saying if giving is part of our social fabric, we should find it in our proverbs, idioms, stories. There should be symbols of giving. So we want to look for that and first put the data on the table. Let's tell the stories. Let's go and find out how are we as Ugandans doing philanthropy. That is the aim. And then what needs to be elevated into a policy conversation, what needs to be elevated in other ways. I hope I made my point clear.
Thank you. Yes, I'll go back to the issue of government quickly, which came in about what I said. Maybe we are not misunderstood what I was saying. I'm not saying we are going to go back to government as government necessarily into our sport. No, we should. But I think my point was that this being a policy lab, it's government which makes policies. And there's no way they can make a policy that supports something like this if they do not understand what community philanthropy is about. So it's very important that they are able to buy into it, and in their policy formulation, they could make policies that will support this kind of thing.